news out of today for the president the way that the administration had hoped?
No, certainly not. And President Trump was asked about Sessions, and he said he has total confidence in him. This was This was a rather short address that we heard from him, and it does come still, while there's some issues when it comes to his defense spending proposals, and that being that he wants to spend what some people would say is a lot of money, but some Republicans say is not enough, and that he wants to cut from the budget. But even that sort of disagreement is being, as David said, really overshadowed by what is going on with Jeff Sessions. What is your read right now on where this stands? And also, a lot of people look at Donald Trump saying he has total confidence in Sessions, and they say, didn't he say that about Michael Flynn?
Yes, he did. Look, I think right now you've got a firestorm on Capitol Hill. You've got lots of Republicans saying that at the very least that the Attorney General ought to recuse himself on anything that has to do with the Russia investigation. And I think at some point it has to come to a head. And it wouldn't surprise me, and I have no knowledge of this, but it wouldn't surprise me if at some point Jeff Sessions, who's been around Washington for a while, would come out and speak about it and kind of tell the American public what happened when he met with the Russian ambassador and why he didn't disclose it at the time of his confirmation, and try and sort of get this behind him. And perhaps at that same moment he could recuse himself, because it is at this point the path of least resistance for him. So that would not surprise me in the least.
And we're going to be talking about Jeff Sessions again in just a moment. But Colonel, while I have you here, I want to talk about defense spending and why Donald Trump was there in Newport News, because this is very important. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars here. One of the promises he made was that soon the Navy is going to be the largest that it's been. And he said you got to get a good deal, the same boat or ship or airplanes for less money. But he's actually standing on an aircraft carrier. Maybe this is to his point, that is, I mean, it's a budget buster, right? For how many billions of dollars it cost?
Absolutely, Brianna. The one thing about this aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R Ford, is not only is it a budget buster, but it was also delayed multiple times because of equipment issues and other issues that deal with the acquisition process. So one of the things that he really should do is actually reform the acquisition process within the Pentagon. And that is probably a very tough thing, and you won't see that in a budget document, and that's one of the key challenges I think he'll face.
Yeah, those are some of the devil in the details there. All right, I want to get back to Jeff Sessions. David Chalian, I know you've been looking at the reports. The Washington Post broke this first. CNN has confirmed this. But this discussion between Jeff Sessions, there were two discussions, but there was one that was of particular concern, and that's because it was a private meeting with the Russian ambassador in Jeff Sessions' office. His spokesperson at first, according to the Wall Street Journal and Carol Lee's reporting, was that at first she said the meeting was on the phone, and then it turned out the meeting was actually in person, she clarified. And then, according to the Washington Post, he doesn't recall what he said, and yet at the same time he said before Congress he was talking, or he didn't say, he said when he said before Congress that he did not talk to the ambassador, did not have contacts, it was because he wasn't doing so as a surrogate. These facts are all over the place.
Yes, and Jeff Sessions, clarified without saying I'm clarifying this morning, trying to clean this up a little bit, saying, but we weren't talking about the campaign at that meeting, which I also just find hard to believe that the campaign at all didn't come up, because in early September, I don't know any conversations in Washington that weren't somehow tangentially connected to the campaign. So this is all part of the call you're hearing from some Republicans as well, not just Democrats, for him to clarify his comments in addition to the whole call for recusal. Brianna, I do want to note one thing, having just watched President Trump on at the ship there at the USS Gerald Ford. I didn't anticipate that President Trump was going to address this from that venue, certainly not. But I thought it was also interesting that he seems to be keeping with this notion of not going off on Twitter in the last few days, not taking this opportunity for yet another sort of Russia tied to the Trump world story out there to slam the news media about fake news or to discredit. He just ignored it and really tried to stay focused on what he was there to talk about. That is not, we've not always seen that kind of discipline with President Trump.
Yeah, and the question, I think, is, Gloria, can he put day after day of that together? Because he's shown that he, in the past, that he cannot do that. So it seems like the expectation of many people, they believe, just wait a moment, right? Just wait until he does chime in.
Right. Well, look, he received a lot of applause for the way he conducted himself during his address to the joint session of Congress. I think the question has been whether he can take that tone and continue it. And there are a lot of people saying he can't. And today, I think that the discipline that David's talking about, he really did exhibit. He stuck to the script. One of the reasons he stuck to the script, I'm sure, is because they wanted him to. His staff wanted him to. It was not the venue to discuss Jeff Sessions. At some point, though, I think you're going to hear the president talk about it, but there may be some kind of choreography going on here in which the president lets Jeff Sessions speak for himself. And so, which is, I would argue, is as it should be. And in order to answer all of these questions, I think he needs to. And don't forget, these are questions coming from both sides of the aisle here. And while the Republicans are not calling for his head, they are calling for clarification. And I think when you have a groundswell of Republicans starting to call for clarification, there's only one person who can do it, and that's the Attorney General himself.
Colonel, what is your impression, as someone who's obviously been very involved in government, what is your impression of what you are watching unfold here in this controversy where Donald Trump was enjoying some very positive headlines and now this is totally turned around?
Well, Brianna, I think what you're looking at here is, the president trying to do one message, and, as a government person, you always look to the commander-in-chief or to the boss as the president to give you that direction, to give you a way forward. You're kind of waiting for that, for lack of a better term, New Deal moment that FDR would have. And when you don't get that, or when that message is subsumed by other things, such as the issue with Attorney General Sessions, then you get not only a mixed message, but you also have difficulty carrying out the mission that you're entrusted with because you don't get that clear direction you're looking for.
So you see this as a test really of leadership or an opportunity for him to demonstrate some, and the jury's still out?
Absolutely. That is exactly right. And if this leadership test is going to be passed by the president, he is going to have to not only stay on message, but he's also going to have to take it to the next level, not only rebuild the Navy, rebuild the rest of the military, but have a vision for the future of the country that he continually pursues. And that is something that, of course, he's going to be competing for airtime with. You've got the Sessions issue, you had the Flynn issue before, and those are the kinds of things that are going to happen. And if he can stay on message and stay disciplined, like David and Gloria have mentioned, that will be the key to him being successful.
To the Attorney General, sir. Total.
Heads up. Heads up.
Thank you, guys.
That's all. Long guy.
Sure, we have some other stuff we'd like to take you back to, so more stuff to follow here. President, we can ask you. Pardon me.
Mr. President, should Sessions recuse himself from investigations into your campaign in Russia?
Pardon me.
I don't think so at all.
When did you first learn that Sessions spoke to the Russian ambassador? Did you know during your campaign? When were you aware that he spoke to the Russian ambassador?
I wasn't aware of that.
When did you find out?
He should have spoken truthfully about whether he had spoken with the ambassador.
I think he probably did. Going back.
All right, that was fascinating. David Chalian, Gloria Borger. Okay, so it's a little hard to hear there because they're in the hallway, sort of in the interior there of that aircraft carrier. But I mean, David, what I heard him say was that he thought he may have told the truth. That was sort of what I heard near the end, but he also said didn't know that he had spoken to the ambassador.
That's right. And Brianna, the White House said they had not learned of this until public press reports, the Washington Post report specifically, emerged last night, which I also find quite surprising because, as you know, this team went through this with Michael Flynn, with this particular Russian ambassador, and one might think that in mid-January, when they had to sort of learn about all the contact that Michael Flynn had with the Russian ambassador, that perhaps they would have broadened their scope and tried to learn of every contact any one of their nominees had with this Russian ambassador, but it seems that they didn't, because they didn't know of this as part of Sessions' confirmation hearing prep or as part of the nomination process overall.
So, Gloria, Michael Flynn, he spoke to the Russian ambassador. He later said and relayed to the vice president that he did not talk about sanctions. Turned out, actually, he did talk about sanctions. So he misled the vice president. He did interfere with foreign policy when his guy wasn't in the White House. He ends up having to resign. How is this any different when, I mean, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that there has been an FBI investigation into this, and it has to do with the guy who's over the FBI. How does this end differently? Do you think it does?
Well, it's hard to play this out right now. The question, I think, right now before the Congress is, did Jeff Sessions, no matter what occurred in those meetings, did Jeff Sessions intentionally lie to the Congress or mislead the Congress? Choose whatever word you want to choose. And that is a question that they need to get to the bottom of. You know, it's not as if if you misspeak during a confirmation hearing, there is ample opportunity to go back and correct the record, particularly given the fact that you also submit answers to questions in writing.
That's right, a written questionnaire.
That's right. So if something is wrong, you can go back and say, oops, I made a mistake. I checked my calendar. I checked my records. Yes, I did meet with the ambassador briefly once after I gave a speech at the convention, and then once again, and we discussed general things, but you know, nothing in particular. It was a get-to-know-you kind of session. Who knows? So there was opportunity to correct it. It was not corrected. And I think this is where the rubber meets the road as far as Congress is concerned, because you're under oath. And they want to know if this was an oversight, he didn't remember, or whether this was something more nefarious. And they're going to continue to demand questions to that, because when you serve on a congressional committee, when you vote to confirm someone in the president's cabinet, you have to presume that what they are telling you is true, since you're under oath, and this has been a large issue. So I think that's the first thing that needs to get resolved. And then you can go on to the larger issues of the fact that he's the chief law enforcement officer of this country. And lying or misleading it would be a real problem for him and for the administration.
Certainly. David Chalian, Gloria Borger, thank you so much. And now this.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Top of the hour, and I want to restart our special live coverage. The Attorney General under fire. Moments ago, the president said Jeff Sessions should not recuse himself from any investigation of Russian links to the Trump campaign. This runs counter to a growing list of members of his own party. So far, no Republican has gone as far as joining the call of these Democrats, including top House Democrat Nancy Pelosi. They are actually demanding that Sessions resign. Now, all of this a reaction to the Justice Department revealing that Sessions, a former Trump campaign official, met with Russia's ambassador twice during the election season. This, of course, we should mention, was prompted by reporting initially broken by the Washington Post. But Sessions failed to disclose those meetings twice in an online questionnaire for his confirmation, in which he was asked, quote, several of the president-elect's nominees or senior advisors have Russian ties. Have you been in contact with anyone connected to any part of the Russian government about the 2016 election, either before or after Election Day? No, he responded. Also on camera, Sessions had this exchange.
CNN just published a story alleging that the intelligence community provided documents to the president-elect last week that included information that, quote, Russian operatives claimed to have compromising personal and financial information about Mr. Trump. These documents also allegedly stated, quote, there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government. Now, again, I'm telling you this as it's coming out, so, you know. But if it's true, it's obviously extremely serious. And if there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do?
Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of those activities. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians.
Sessions' first meeting with Sergei Kislyak came on the sidelines of the Republican convention in July, and then the second time, perhaps of more import, was in September, because this was in Sessions' Senate office. The Attorney General today defending himself.
Well, I have not met with any Russians at any time to discuss any political campaign, and those remarks are unbelievable to me and are false, and I don't have anything else to say about that.
What about
so
the call to recuse yourself from your agency's probe of the...
Well, I've said that whenever it's appropriate, I will recuse myself. There's no doubt about that.
Attorney General. John, since you did support Jeff Sessions here, what's your reaction to all of this?
Jeff Sessions is one of the most honest and man of the greatest integrity I've ever worked with in Washington. And to suggest that he's lying, I mean, look, at the beginning of the Obama administration,
but what do you think happened then? What do you think happened then when he testified and also put it in writing?
There's a kind of hysteria. At the beginning of Obama, they were pushed to reset on Russia to try to have better relations.
No, but I'm talking about from his perspective. He did something, right? He testified.
If you read the transcript, you've shown it. The transcript said there's been reports by CNN that some of the campaign staff have been in touch with the Russians. Sessions answered, if I'm paraphrasing, I don't know anything about that. I've been a surrogate. I haven't been meeting with the Russians. The context was obviously about the campaign. One of these reports of a subsequent meeting was a reception where there was a room full of people and a Russian ambassador was there. And the other is something that's been explained in terms of his responsibilities as a senator. So, I mean, there's a kind of hysterical theory that Trump is selling us out to the Russians, just as there was on the right, where Obama was selling us out to the Russians. It's kind of the lunatic fringe that seems to have become populated by people who should know better.
PJ, what do you think?
Well, I don't think this is about the lunatic fringe. I think there's a large issue and then a smaller issue. The larger issue is we still need to understand what Russia tried to do during the 2016 campaign. There's little doubt about the relationship between Russian intelligence and Julian Assange. We need to get to the bottom of that. In the process of getting to the bottom of that, we need to understand what contacts might have been made between the Trump campaign and Russian officials. Might be benign, might not be benign. Again, we have to get to the bottom of it. Certainly Jeff Sessions has not done himself any favors by, at a minimum, giving a misleading answer. I think it's up to the Attorney General to clarify, why would he, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, need to talk to the Russian ambassador. What did they talk about? If it was about sanctions in Ukraine, then it's a non-issue. If it's about something else regarding the campaign, then it obviously is an issue, and that what probably would lead you, as Lindsey Graham and others have suggested, that Jeff Sessions needs to be prepared, to recuse himself as we understand more about what actually happened.
John, I see you shaking your head. And Laura, I have a legal question for you, but I just have to see what John is shaking his head at.
Well, look, I mean, Sessions has said he's met with over 25 ambassadors. I don't understand what your guess there. Does he not know that senators in these important committees meet with diplomats from other governments all the time?
So the Washington Post,
on, this is kind of phony ignorance about what really goes on.
The Washington Post asked all 26 of the...
In all fairness, there's nothing phony about it. On 2 occasions, the senator was asked, did you meet with any Russian officials? On 2 occasions, he said no. Now we understand he did. Now I understand why that meeting would have taken place, and it might be perfectly understandable. The context here is that Sessions on 2 occasions said no, and now we understand that that answer was not as forthcoming as it should have been.
He was asked a question in context. Again, what's the underlying issue? The underlying issue has to be that's serious here is that somebody is subverting the U.S. government. That's ludicrous.
Actually, it's not about the lunatic fringe you're talking about, and I'm neither a lunatic or hysterical. And I can tell you that the P word you're using, a phony, is not the accurate one for the legal minds. It's the word perjury. And as much as you want to talk about whether there is a subversion or attempt to have Russian contacts, the issue, legally speaking, is whether or not you were forthcoming or honest in a sworn testimony or on paper. And in both cases, it looks like Jeff Sessions was not. The question now is, what are you going to do about it as the leader of the Department of Justice? And you know as well as I do that the figurehead, that is the Attorney General in some instances, is the person who should be setting the example to say, listen, if there is even the hint of impropriety, that this will not be an objective agency or an objective investigation that will actually honor Lady Liberty or justice, then I have to recuse myself and allow the line attorneys to do their work. And you know that Loretta Lynch did just that when there was a hint of impropriety about her interaction with Bill Clinton on the plane on that tarmac that day. And so you have before you not an issue of whether or not there was an actual wrongful conversation between Jeff Sessions and the ambassador. The issue is whether or not you were under oath, he was, and whether or not you made a misstatement that was akin to perjury. That's the investigation, and that is what needs to happen now.
Does it require intent, though? Because isn't that part of it?
It is, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's very hard to prove, and of course that's really the lifeline that Sessions will hold on to, because you have to prove intentionally withholding or intentionally misleading, and this is why everyone hates lawyers. We parse words and battle over semantics, and this is no different. It's very hard to be able to figure out whether somebody was intentionally nefarious in the withholding or the inaccurate statement, or whether or not it was simply a issue of amnesia, as he'd like to say. So that's the battle we're having right now, but it's not about the greater issue of Russian interference. The issue at this time, the issue is whether or not the leader of the Department of Justice was honest under oath, a requirement we have for every defendant and witness in every courtroom and in every hearing.
John?
Can I just say one thing? I believe I'm the only one here who was actually in the hearing room when Senator Franken asked the question and Senator Sessions answered it. Even knowing what we know now, I will tell you that there is no question in my mind that Senator Sessions answered truthfully and fully in the context of the question. There's no question of perjury, there's no question of a lifeline, and this is made up.
Why, John, and I hear what you're saying, and certainly it sounds...
I was there.
But the case that his office is making, and obviously this is how former Senator Sessions feels, is that he was sort of thinking just with his campaign surrogate hat on, and as a campaign surrogate he felt that he hadn't done anything wrong, and yet clearly
you could make up possibilities here, but he was in a reception with a bunch of other ambassadors and a bunch of other people.
No, I'm talking about the meeting in his office. No.
Okay.
He met with the Russian ambassador in his office.
I don't know what the substance of the meeting.
In September, while the cyber attacks were in full throttle.
Again, he met with 25 ambassadors. I run a think tank.
I'm talking about the meeting one-on-one in his office with the Russian ambassador.
We have senators and congressmen over all the time to talk about policy. We have ambassadors from the diplomatic corps there. They talk to them sometimes afterwards or not. They're interested in the same issues. There doesn't have to be anything nefarious, and there doesn't have to be anything that was outside the context of the question he was asked in the hearing and the context of his work in the Senate. We want our representatives to have a wider understanding of the interests of other nations to carry out their business for America. I really do think this is not a question of perjury. This is kind of nasty politics that's now gotten to such an extreme craziness that again, the only serious thing underneath this is Is there subversion of the U.S. government? And that's nuts.
PJ, what do you think?
Well, I think that is the issue, is to understand what happened during the 2016 campaign, what Russia tried to do and how they tried to do it. Now, I think that needs to go forward. As part of this, it's not a made-up issue. The question is Jeff Sessions, as Attorney General, in a position either based on reality, based on perception, to be the one who guides this investigation? That is a legitimate question to ask in light of the revelations of the last 24 or 48 hours.